The distress call was pleading and desperate, plainly laying out the next move for the captain of HMS Laurentic. They plotted a new course and set forth, knowing that a U-boat more than likely laid in waiting for them, hungry for another victim. Would HMS Laurentic make it out of World War II? Or would she join her namesake at the bottom of the Atlantic? Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for our younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. As you could probably guess, White Star Line ships are my favorite ships to cover, so let's get into SS Laurentic, starting with a bit of background information. Like many shipping companies, White Star Line struggled in the 1920s. The immigrant trade was slowing down and the cruising industry was starting to pick up in the Roaring Twenties, so shipping companies were having to adapt. Not only that, but aging Edwardian-era ocean liners were no longer the rage, and so shipping lines had to adjust their strategies. The White Star Line was still part of the International Mercantile Marine Company, or IMM for short. There was a possibility of the company being thrown out by some of the management for IMM that wanted to rid themselves of non-American subsidiaries. This unsteady time frame would bring about many ships, including SS Laurentic. Her building and career are just odd, starting with the fact that it was the only ship in 60 years of ships built exclusively by Harland & Wolff for the White Star Line that the shipyard would be given a specific budget. She also was probably discounted, which was also unusual for the White Star Line. That goes to show how difficult the 1920s was for the company, and the oddities wouldn't stop there. SS Laurentic, completed in 1927, had the hull number 470. This wouldn't seem odd if it weren't for SS Doric, a ship built 4 years prior, which had the hull number 573. This could mean a multitude of things, but more than likely, the ship had been ordered prior to 1921 and there was a 7-year delay. This isn't confirmed and we don't know why there would be such an extensive delay, but it could be because Harland & Wolff already had projects happening at the time, or the fact that there could have been a severe materials shortage. All of this could have caused a delay, and that would be the most likely cause of the odd hull number. She was ordered after SS Regina, SS Pittsburgh, and SS Doric, but she looked similar to them, with 2 tall masts framing the ship. Let's get more into her specs and designs, shall we? She was an ocean liner in all regards, with her tonnages sitting at 18,724 gross registered tons and 11,103 net registered tons. She was 578.2 feet long, had a beam of 75.4 feet wide, and a depth of 40.6 feet deep, spanning 4 decks. She was serviced by a crew of 420 officers and crew. We're going to get into her capacity, and this is where we see some of the shifts in the 1920s that I was talking about. Shipping companies started moving away from the traditional 3-class system of first, second, and third classes, and they moved into cabin and tourist classes, which were basically like first class and economy class on an airplane. However, the 2-class system was seen more in the 30s and 40s, so during the transition we have third class, tourist class, and cabin class. She was capable of carrying 594 cabin class passengers, 406 tourist class, and 500 third class for a grand total of 1,500 passengers. She was painted the typical color scheme for White Star Line ships at the time, a red keel, black hull, and white superstructure with her 2 funnels being painted buff with black tips. Her name was emblazoned on both sides of her bow, and a thin gold stripe of paint lined the hull within the black coloring. Her UK official number was 149642, and her code letters were KWPV until 1933, then changing to the call sign GNJT. If you know me, you know I'm a sucker for solid davit designs, especially HMHS Britannics. While Regina, Pittsburgh, and Doric had crane-shaped davits for their lifeboats, SS Laurentic was unique in that she had her lifeboats on davits lined up in a double row of 7 boats on each side. Her aft funnel would be attached to a boiler room, unlike the previously mentioned ships whose aft funnels were connected to the engine rooms. SS Laurentic also had a glass screen covering the promenade area in the forward end with cruiser windows, reminiscent of RMS Adriatic in 1907. Her interior was comfortable and swank, including a Renaissance-style lounge for the cabin class, Jacobean-style smoking room and veranda cafe like that of Titanic's, a card lounge, children's playroom, and gym. The most bougie of her cabin class cabins were in the Louis XIV and Louis XVI styles. Now let's get into her propulsion. She had a similar profile to SS Doric, though she was different in that she was still coal-fired instead of oil-fired, like her more modern contemporaries. Her propulsion would be very similar to the first SS Laurentic, which was built in 1909 and was fast enough to chase down a murderous duo. She had two 4-cylinder triple expansion steam engines that drove the port and starboard propellers, and her middle propeller was driven by one low-pressure steam turbine that recycled exhaust steam from the engine. This was called combination machinery, and this revolutionary engine design was first seen on SS Laurentic, the one built in 1909, and though this engine setup was so incredible for the time that it even wound up on RMS Titanic, it was replaced by the 1920s by the usage of geared steam turbines alone. White Star Line probably chose the tried and true method because they knew it worked, but this and the fact that she was coal-fired made her incredibly expensive to operate, which more than likely contributed to her shortened passenger career. With this setup, she averaged service speeds of 16.5 knots, 3 knots slower than the 1909 version of SS Laurentic. And like the earlier Laurentic, SS Laurentic of 1927 would service the Liverpool to Quebec to Montreal route, with her port of registry being placed in Liverpool. She does have a military career, so we're going to get into her armament for a moment. Later on during her military career, SS Laurentic would be armed with BL 6-inch Mark 7 naval guns, as well as QF 3-inch 12-pounder anti-aircraft guns. She also had submarine signaling capabilities and wireless direction finding in place by 1930. During World War II, as part of the Royal Navy, she'd be marked as Pennant F-51. She was armed to the teeth. And speaking of teeth, is that a smile I see on your face? If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know down in the comments section below. Enough of our goofy self-promotions, let's get into SS Laurentic's career. She was built sometime in 1926, with a planned launch for October of 1926, but this was delayed significantly because of the general strike, which was a 9-day strike in the UK from May 4th to the 12th in 1926 to try and force the British government to prevent wage reductions and worsening conditions. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful, and delayed the launch of SS Laurentic to June 16th of 1927, and she'd be completed on November 1st of that year. Her maiden voyage would kick off from Liverpool on November 12, 1927, though not on the intended Canadian route. She'd instead head to New York City, and then made a second round trip to New York on December 31, 1927. After this, she'd cruise in the Mediterranean twice in January and March of 1928, then beginning her Canadian route from Liverpool to Quebec to Montreal on April 27, 1928. There were already 2 ships in 1927 that were regularly servicing this route, SS Calgaric and SS Albertic, along with help from SS Megantic, SS Regina, and SS Doric. Sooner rather than later, the Great Depression creeped up on the world, and as times got tougher, the amount of passengers crossing the Atlantic dwindled. SS Regina was sold to another company in 1929, being named SS Westernland and later scrapped in 1947. SS Calgaric would be laid up from 1930 to 1933, being set to cruises in 1933 and scrapped in 1934. SS Megantic would be laid up in 1931 and scrapped in 1933. And SS Albertic would be moved to the Liverpool to New York City route until August of 1930, when she'd be laid up in the River Clyde, later being sold and scrapped in 1934. In 1932, SS Doric would also be put on cruising duty, and so that left SS Laurentic all alone on the England to Canada route. On October 3, 1932, she collided with SS Lurigethan of the Mountain Steamship Company in the Strait of Belle Isle, and both ships were damaged above the waterline but were able to limp into harbor. After an inquiry into the accident, SS Laurentic would be assigned, quote, 55% responsible for the collision, whatever that means. How they came up with exactly 55% beats me, friends. As the Great Depression continued to sap away the world's energy, money, and faith, SS Laurentic would try to hold a steady career. On February 25, 1934, she made her final crossing on a regular line for White Star Line between Boston, Liverpool, and Halifax, Nova Scotia. In March of 1934, she escorted 700 pilgrims from Dublin, Ireland to Rome, Italy for Easter, and for this particular trip, 10 altars were installed for priests to be able to perform Mass, and a cinema was installed. On May 10, 1934, White Star Line and Cunard Line merged, with many surplus ships being sold and scrapped in the process, including the beloved RMS Olympic and RMS Mauretania. SS Laurentic would be placed temporarily back on the Montreal route before being relegated to cruising once more. In either 1933 or 1934, sources differ, there was a worldwide revision of the code letters for merchant ships, and that's when her code letters KWPV were changed to GNJT. Now under the Cunard White Star Line flag in the summer of 1935, SS Laurentic cruised a myriad of times in Scandinavia, with fares being reported as £1 per day. In modern-day equivalents, that would be £58.53 per day. This sounds positively lovely. However, one of these beautiful cruises was soured by an accident. On the night of Sunday, August 18, 1935, SS Laurentic proceeded into the Irish Sea laden with 620 passengers readying for bed. At the same time, Blue Star Line's refrigerated cargo ship SS Napier Star came out of nowhere and crashed into the side of SS Laurentic, her bow sinking deep into Laurentic's hull. This would instantly kill 6 crew and injure 5 more, with the passengers being roused and ordered to their muster stations. However, a while later, after the ship's captain had been able to assess the damage further, he ordered everyone back to bed and the ship returned to Liverpool the next morning. Passengers were then offered a refund trip aboard SS Historic. However, she'd also be in a collision a few days later, and this ended her career. She was deemed a constructive total loss, and SS Historic was scrapped in November of 1935. The damage to SS Laurentic from her collision was not cataclysmic, but it did cost around £20,000, and these repairs were immediately performed so that she could continue on to carry pilgrims from Dublin to Lourdes, France on September 6, 1935, but it's unclear if she made this deadline. We do know Harland and Wolff worked their tails off to get the ship repaired, and she was able to cruise one last time, making her final commercial voyage. She'd be laid up in the River Mersey in December of 1935. She could have very well been scrapped at this point, especially with how costly it was to operate the ship and how archaic her engine design must have seemed when compared to other mid-1930s contemporaries. However, she would be dry docked in Gladstone Dock in Liverpool after 9 months in September of 1936 to get her back up to snuff. After this, she immediately left on September 14th to head to Southampton, and here she embarked British troops to take them to Haifa, Israel, in response to the Arab revolt in Palestine, which lasted from 1936 to 1939. After this, she returned to Southampton, being laid up once more. In 1937, she took part in the Coronation Naval Review of King George VI at Spithead, with various government guests aboard. From April of 1938 until World War II, she was laid up first in Southampton and then later at Falmouth. This was the beginning of the end for SS Laurentic. But wait, we aren't done just yet! This episode couldn't be possible without our lovely patrons. Thank you all so much. If you'd like to support the channel and future episodes, go to patreon.com/shipwrecksunday to join. Now that's out of the way, let's get into her military career. Tensions were already on the rise in Europe long before World War II began, with Germany slowly adopting fascist ideals over the course of the 1930s. Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933 after a series of electoral victories by the Nazi Party, and he ruled absolutely until his death in April of 1945. Under his iron fist, Germany began to prosper, and he gained the majority of his people's blind faith, leading them into the invasion of Poland and violation of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Germany and the Soviet Union on September 1, 1939. This marked the beginning of World War II and the end of the allyship with the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. SS Laurentic would be swept up into this whole mess. England would declare war on Germany on September 3, 1939, following the invasion of Poland. However, they could already see Germany was up to something sneaky before this, and began to prepare themselves. Part of this preparation had to do with SS Laurentic, with the ocean liner being requisitioned by the Admiralty on August 26, 1939, to be converted into an armed merchant cruiser for the Royal Navy. This conversion was completed on October 15, 1939, and she was one of the last ships of the Royal Navy to be coal-bunkered. I can't find any information on what she did before her sinking, but we do know about her final mission. A wireless distress signal came in aboard HMS Laurentic from the Elders and Fifes banana boat Cunard at 9:40 p.m. on November 3, 1940. The German submarine U-99 had torpedoed the small ship in the western approaches of the Bloody Foreland in Ireland. HMS Laurentic, as well as another armed merchant cruiser, HMS Patroclus, responded to Cunard's distress call, steaming toward her. When they arrived on scene at 10:50 p.m., U-99 lashed out at the once great White Star Line ship, launching a single torpedo that hit HMS Laurentic in her engine room. Everyone was frazzled from the attack, with a hole tearing open in the side of the hull from the first torpedo. Later at 11:28 p.m., U-99 launched a second torpedo that bounced off HMS Laurentic without detonating. 9 minutes later, at 11:37 p.m., they launched a third torpedo that exploded in the hole made by the first torpedo's explosion. After this, HMS Laurentic spotted U-99 and opened fire with her various guns. During this firefight, HMS Patroclus was busy rescuing survivors from Cunard, and U-99 turned on her. Between 12:02 a.m. and 1:18 a.m. on November 4th, U-99 launched 4 torpedoes that struck HMS Patroclus, as well as firing 2 of her 4 rounds from her deck gun. U-99 acted viciously toward the 2 armed merchant cruisers, determined to sink them both quickly and quietly. Unfortunately for the Germans, a Royal Air Force short Sunderland flying boat passed by overhead, forcing U-99 to crash dive. However, U-99 wasn't retreating just yet. She laid in wait like a cheetah waiting to pounce on a gazelle, and at 4:04 a.m. the time was right for her to resurface and resume her hunt. At 4:53 a.m. she shot another torpedo into Laurentic that hit near the stern, detonating Laurentic's depth charges. After this, she sank within minutes. 2 officers and 47 ratings of her 416-man complement were killed in the sinking. After HMS Laurentic's demise, U-99 turned her sights back to HMS Patroclus, torpedoing her twice more at 5:16 and 5:25 a.m. respectively, breaking her back and sending her to the bottom of the Atlantic alongside HMS Laurentic. 76 of her complement, including her captain, sank with her. A destroyer called HMS Hesperus then arrived on scene, running off U-99 and then turning her attention to the survivors of HMS Laurentic. She rescued HMS Laurentic's commander, Captain E.P. Vivian, as well as 316 ratings and 50 officers, totaling 367 survivors from HMS Laurentic. The destroyer HMS Beagle came on scene and was able to save 230 survivors from HMS Patroclus. SS Laurentic was one of the last 4 White Star Line ships, along with MV Britannic launched in 1929 and MV Georgic launched in 1932, as well as the Olympic-class tender ship SS Nomadic, which still exists to this day and is the last surviving White Star Line vessel. SS Laurentic would be the last White Star Line ship to sink, marking the end of an era. Covering SS Laurentic was both a pleasure and saddening. Any ship that is in the last years of the White Star Line is saddening for me, since it is my favorite shipping company and they have so many beautiful ships. Laurentic's career was measly, and her military career barely noteworthy outside of the sinking, but that doesn't mean she wasn't an important part of history, being that her sinking was the final stain on White Star Line's vast career of ships sunk, lost, and scrapped. If you liked that story and wanted to hear something similar, check out our White Star Line ships playlist in the cards. Stay tuned next week for the story of USS Sable, one of 2 side-wheel paddle steamships that became Great Lakes aircraft carriers. Thank you for tuning into Shipwreck Sunday, have a great week, and we'll see you next time.